Hello, my name is Darrell Dominic, formerly known as Smiley-D, and this is my story. So my story begins in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. I was raised on the east side, single mother, 5 kids, and times was really hard. Going to school, in elementary school, kids started repping the shotgun Crips at a young age, and I was never really one of those kids. My mom's, she raised me with morals and things like that. We was raised in church and all those things, and so I was really like Kendrick Lamar, like a good kid, Mad City and everything, but influences definitely surrounded me and everything. And my cousins, they were in the gangs, they were gang banging, going in and out of prison. My uncle, he was in prison. Me and my cousin used to go see him all the time. He was a blood and everything, and so these things definitely were around me and everything, but due to my mom's raising me with morals and raising me in church and everything, I didn't really engage in that. However, how this influenced me was I would get into a lot of fights in school and everything, but I never saw myself as a part of the gang culture. And so even though I was around it, I was around a lot of crackheads, seeing crackheads, roam the streets and just a lot of gang banging activities. I used to see tons of Crips come out and fight in apartment complex. I just never really engaged with it. I never saw myself as a part of that culture or anything. And so growing up, I tried to stay clear of it. I tried to, be a good kid and everything, but I also saw this kind of anger, raising up within me because my moms and pops, they split up when I was 3 years old. They got divorced and whatnot, and I would see my pops every other weekend, and I didn't know why these things were going on or whatnot, but these things were definitely affecting me. Going into middle school, I was 6th grade, and going into middle school, we had to go through metal detectors. So I assumed it was because of like the environment, the gang banging culture and all of those things, and so that may have been what it was. We also had to wear a uniform and everything, and so surrounded by those types of influences and that type of culture. A few friends of mine, they were into building video games and things like that, and it's a predominantly black neighborhood, and so I really connected with those guys, and we built solid friendships. Fast forward, my mom, she was in an abusive marriage and everything, and just trying to figure out how to navigate that, times waking up in the middle of the night. My stepdaddy, he was like, beating on the door or things like that. My mama wouldn't let him in. He breaks the window, just all those different types of dysfunctions and all those different types of scenarios. And being raised around that, I didn't really understand it as much, but it had an impact on me. So in 2000, my mom's put us on a Greyhound. She wanted to get out of her abusive marriage, and she put me and 2 of my sisters. One of my sisters was a senior in high school. I was in 7th grade. My younger sister was in 6th grade or 5th grade. And she put us on a Greyhound to move to Washington State. We rode a Greyhound bus for 3 days to move up here, and there was a lot of uncertainty on what was going on up here, or, all I knew was my mama wanted to get out of the hood. And so she got us out of there and everything, and so we came up here. Upon arriving to Seattle, we got picked up by my mom's friend's son, and he brought us over to Bremerton, where I eventually would be raised from age 12 to 18. And being brought here, we were living in their apartment. My mom's friend's son, his baby moms, and his daughter, they had a 2-bedroom apartment, and so me, my mama, and my 2 sisters, we stayed in that 1 bedroom for a little while until my mama could get her own 2-bedroom apartment. And so during this time, it was a lot of frustration and everything. I felt like I didn't fit in. I had a lot of kids making fun of me because of my accent at that time. And my mama used to buy my clothes and everything, and so kids would make fun of my clothes. I wasn't up on the trends. I had to wear a school uniform, going to school because of gangs and stuff. And so I wasn't really up on like the culture and everything. And so, I felt like even more like an outsider when I moved up here. And so I was getting into more fights. That aggression and that anger just really started building up, and I didn't know why. I didn't understand it. So at 12 years old, I was really into hip hop. I had a dream of becoming a hip hop artist. I felt like it was something I could do. I felt like, we grew up in poverty and all those different things. And, You know, I like what they have. I mean, they got women, they got cars, they got money, you know, things like that. And me, I was just a hood boy, you know, just struggling. Like, you know, our family struggling, you know, my mama on SSI, just trying to figure out life, you know, and I felt like hip hop was something that I really connected with. So growing up through the rest of my teenage years, hip hop became a huge influence in my life. I really loved the culture, but I knew they talked about how they got money and how they got successful and everything, and it really got me pondering like, dang, what do I need to be to get successful? What do I need to do to get successful? And so slowly but surely I started getting influenced in these ways of like, okay, you know, this is what I've been seeing. You know, I started making connections with my childhood. This is what I've been seeing people doing, you know, people selling drugs, people gang banging and all these different things. And I started seeing like, this is how people get money. And so, you know, I tried applying for jobs and things like that. I was being turned down from jobs. I got turned down twice from KFC. The second time, my mama went to the interview with me, and I still got turned down for the job. And so that was just even more discouraging because like I didn't have the skills to get employed, as well as the skills to make the basketball team. I felt like, you know, my mama didn't know of any resources to put me into sports and things like that. She tried her best and everything, but I just felt disconnected from society. So when I was 16, my cousin, he moved up from Oklahoma City, and he was one of the OG gangbangers for the Shotgun Crips and everything, and he had some things going on legally or whatnot. And he came up here and he took me under his wing, you know. You know, he began showing me the game. You know, I began learning how to sell drugs. I began, you know, getting into more fights and things like that, and starting to change and starting to really like embrace this lifestyle. I began using drugs. I began skipping school, all those different things. And I really started to see a change within myself and me being someone that I knew my mama didn't raise me to be. So when I was 18, I moved back down to Oklahoma City. During this time, I really wanted to pursue rap music. And so I moved back down to Oklahoma City. I wanted to be back in the ghetto. I wanted to be back in the hood. And I felt like I had something to prove. I felt like I had to prove myself that I can do this lifestyle and that I could do this music. And so upon doing that, I began working a job and everything, but slowly but surely I just started getting back into selling drugs. You know, I found a connection with weed and ecstasy and all those things. And so I began to sell drugs again. And eventually that became my lifestyle. Moving back when I was 18, I began to really wanting to live this lifestyle, and I began selling drugs. I began smoking more marijuana, you know, quitting my jobs, carrying guns, all those different things. And so I really began to embrace that lifestyle even more. In 2008, I put out my first album. It was called Young in the Game. And during this time when I put out that album, I was rapping about a lot of gangster stuff. I was a gangster rapper. That's what I identified as, and that's what I did in the streets. Upon putting that album out, I began hustling and selling those CDs on the streets and everything, just applying that knowledge that I got from the dope game to the actual music game. During that time, you know, I felt like I was getting pretty successful. And so later, 2008, I did my first radio interview. It was with the biggest station in Oklahoma City at that time. And during that time, I felt like it was big. You know, I felt like I was on top of the world, and I let that pride go to my head. And so the next day after that radio interview, I was at a party and a fight broke out and everything. And so I went to my car and I got my gun and I started shooting in the air. And then I got arrested that night. Getting arrested that night, it was very humbling for me. I got caught with 2 guns. I didn't know what to expect. This was my first time being arrested. I was 20 years old, and I got took down to the county jail. Being in the county jail, I ran across a friend. We ended up talking and everything. And when I got to population, I began to really think about my life and think about where I wanted to go, what direction I wanted to go. And I began to pray to God. My mama raised me in church, and so that's what I knew to do. It was like, okay, I need to pray to God. And so I said a prayer to God and just told him, like, man, I shouldn't be living this way. I need to change my life. I know I wasn't raised this way and all those things. And I felt like I had a genuine heart, but I didn't know what it would take in order to really change. And so that night I got out of jail. At this time I began to bargain with God because I really needed to get this court case off of me with these 2 guns. And so I began to tell God, like, okay, God, you got me out of jail. Now I'll quit smoking weed if you give me a good job. And so I went and failed the drug test at a job, and I didn't get that job. And then I went the next time. I was like, okay, God, I'll really quit smoking weed if you give me a job. And then I went and got another job, and I passed the drug test. And so I began to, give up certain things for God, for him to do certain things for me. I began bargaining and all those different things. Like I stopped smoking weed. I was still drinking alcohol though. I got out of jail. I started working. I quit selling drugs though, and everything. And so I asked God to help me get off this court case, and I ended up getting a lawyer, and I got off with a deferred charge. Misdemeanor carrying a concealed weapon. So around this time, me and my son's mother, we had reunited, and she moved down to Oklahoma City with me. And during this time, I was just working, I was still partying and I was still rapping, but I was going to church and everything. And so I was trying to live legit and everything, and slowly but surely things just started to fade away from me, like just that reality of what happened when I went to jail and everything. And one day my pastor came and talked to me, and he said, you can't be a Christian and do this gangster rap, right? And so I began thinking about it, and I was like, well, to be a Christian, it takes a lot of sacrifice. And so once I learned that, I was like, yeah, I'm not ready to live that lifestyle. And so I ended up leaving the church and everything and just going back to my old ways. And slowly but surely, I started back, cheating on my son's mother, selling drugs, and everything, and still doing this gangster rap. So fast forward to 2010, living this lifestyle, I put out a single with Filthy Rich. This single went on World Star Hip Hop, and it got a lot of traction, and people in my city began to believe in me, started saying like, man, you're gonna make it big, man, that's crazy, you're on World Star Hip Hop and you're doing all these things. And so that pride just began to fuel me even more, like this is my dream, this is my dream. I'm trying to make it out of poverty, I'm trying to help my family get out of these situations and everything. During that time, me and my son's mother split up. I ended up leaving her for another woman, and they moved back to Washington. And so around this time, I was just selling drugs, being a player, all those different things, and doing gangster rap. And I was doing that day after day after day. And I began to feel like this darkness in my soul, like this void. And I was just like, I reached out to one of my friends who was a Christian at the time, and he told me to come to Jesus. And I said, no, I'm not ready to come to Jesus. I know what that cost is. I know what I have to give up in order to come to Jesus, and I'm not ready. So fast forward later, 2010, I ended up putting out another video on World Star Hip Hop. I ended up going to Oakland, shooting a video with Stevie Joe and everything, and people were really behind what I was doing, and they really felt like I was gonna make it. And I was having this battle within myself. This battle was like, okay, this is my dream right here of doing hip hop. And my other battle was like, my conscience is kicking in and telling me that I'm doing something wrong. I'm doing something wrong. I'm not being myself. And so I had to battle with that every day. So at the beginning of 2011, I went to Sacramento, California for my distribution deal. My manager at the time, he had previously managed Mac Dre before he died. He managed Keek the Sneak and everything. And so I was connected in these circles with some big name artists out of the Bay Area. During this time, I was out in California and we were selling drugs. And at the time, I just didn't really know the dangers of what was going on. Like I just was oblivious to it all and was just so focused on the music and everything. And at that time, I had hustled up a lot of money. I had thousands of dollars from selling drugs and things. And I told my son's mother that I was gonna come see my son. And that was my plan, was that once I left California, I was gonna see my son. We went to LA, we went to the All-Star Weekend, that weekend of that year, 2011. And we ended up in Phoenix, Arizona. And so by the time we got to Phoenix, Arizona, everything was going downhill. At the time, I spent most of the money that I hustled up. My manager, he had a gambling issue and everything, and so the money I paid for my distribution deal, I don't know if he gambled that or what, but I felt like he was good for it at the time, just based off his credentials and everything. And I was just down. I was depressed, and I was just like, okay, what's next? Like I came all the way out here to pursue this rap dream, and this happened. So what's gonna happen? So I ended up going back to Oklahoma City, and when I went back to Oklahoma City, I was flat broke. I didn't know where my next meal was gonna come from or anything. I just had a few $100 to my name. And so what I started doing was I started nickel and dime hustling again. And I had a warrant out for my arrest for not appearing in court on some traffic stuff and everything. And so I was driving around town with a warrant and selling drugs. And so during this time, I was really struggling financially, and I really started to feel the sorrow really take over my body and my soul and my heart. And it was just like, man, I let my son down again, you know. I gave his mom another false promise and saying that I was going to be there for him and everything, and send her money to help him out and everything, and I didn't. I went into a deep depression, and people were still celebrating me. You know, I had just done a song with T-Nutty in Sacramento. People were just like, man, you're going to make it big, and they were celebrating me, but I just felt like a lot of sorrow in my heart, a lot of sorrow in my soul, just like a failure and everything. And so April 2011, I was in the trap house where me and my friends were selling drugs out of. My friend Will, at the time, we were drunk and high. We were both just chilling in the house, you know, and everything. And out the middle of nowhere, he begins preaching to me. And so at first I wanted to deny what he was saying, because it was like, dude, you drunk too, you high too. How are you gonna judge me? You know, a lot of times we resort to that, you know, we fall back to that statement. But what he was saying was so true. And he was telling me about, you know, I should be doing my music for God. Like, we see what what's happening in the world, those things, the world needs some positive things. We see what's happening around us. We're tearing down our own people and things of that nature. And those things that he was saying to me was like a sharp dagger to my heart. Like, I literally felt it physically, like, man, like, dang, what he's saying is truth. Like, I can't even deny it. And so during that time, I just told him, I was like, okay, what do you suggest I do? And he said, man, go pray before you read the Bible. I guarantee you God will speak to you. Take note, you know, we're drunk and high during this time. And so, you know, I wiped the dust off my Bible. I haven't touched it in months. And I just said a simple prayer to God. I said, God, if you're trying to say something to me right now, this is your chance to do so. I just flipped my Bible open, and I looked at, and I saw it was on Ecclesiastes chapter 5. My eyes landed right on chapter 5 because it was actually in the middle of the page. And I was like, okay, I'll just read here. And so I started reading, and it talked about how hoarding riches harms the saver, and people spend their money on investments that have nothing left to give to their children. And as soon as I read that statement, it just made me fall back, and was just like, whoa, like, this is exactly what I'm going through in life at this time. How did I open up the Bible straight to this exact passage that I'm going through right now? And then it began to talk about how people that just focus on pursuing money live their life under a cloud of frustration and anger and things like that. And that was just really like mind-blowing to me. It was like, wow, this is how I feel right now. This is how I feel. And then the mic drop was, people can't take their money to the grave with them. And everything that I lived for was just crushed. My whole purpose to make it big and get all this money and to take my son places and all those things, it was crushed, because I learned that I couldn't take that to the grave with me. And so during that time, I just said a prayer to God, like, God, I know you're here in this room with me. I feel you touching my heart. I feel your love. And I just told him that I give it up. I give up the rap music. I'll do music for you if you want me to. And so that was the beginning of my journey. Thank you for listening, and be tuned for more of my life story and more of my music. Thank you.